World History, Chapter 6, Part 1. Basically, in this chapter, we're going to cover three distinct areas of what you might know as the New World or the Western Hemisphere. We'll talk about early societies of the Mesoamerica, early societies of South America, and then the early societies of Oceania, which is basically Australia, New Guinea, the Pacific Islands. Not as much known about them as the other two, as you'll see. Okay, let's begin with Mesoamerica. You know the story about crossing the land bridge, across Beringia, the Bering Strait, basically from Asia into Alaska. Migrants come down through Canada, America, and eventually to the tip of South America. Well, this first wave of migrants come about 13,000 BCE, probably smaller migrations before that. There were certainly migrations after that, but this large-scale migration roughly around that time. Of course, the earliest migrants were hunters-gatherers, as you know from this time period, but pre-agricultural revolution. In this area of Mesoamerica, a little bit unique from the societies we've been talking about, there really was a loss of any large game that they could domesticate. There were no horses or cows. Basically, it was dogs and turkeys that they actually domesticated, and both of these animals were used as food sources as well. As such, they never developed the wheel. They really had no use for it. There wasn't much a dog could carry. Typically, items that were carried on the backs of the peoples themselves. So a little bit different here than in other societies. Really meant that they couldn't harness the external power of some of the large animals. Obviously, the horse changed history in the Eastern Hemisphere. There were ceremonial centers that eventually arose beside villages once agriculture kicked in. The ceremonial villages, not like a true city, it was a place to kind of like a large church, if you will. It was a place to worship the gods and to conduct important and elaborate ceremonies. Eventually, many of these ceremonial centers would grow into fairly large cities, however. And the first culture we'll talk about in Mesoamerica are the Olmecs, and they're kind of considered the mother culture of this region, meaning that all the peoples like the Maya, the Aztecs, all the Teotihuacan, all these other Mesoamerican cultures that come after them borrow from their ideas. They were heavily influenced by the Olmec. The Olmec were most likely authoritarian in nature. You got a king or nobles who run the show. Really not much different than what we've seen in other places of the world. Commoners, for the most part, labored on behalf of the elite. It was a place of fantastic pyramids. When we think of pyramids, we like to think of Egypt, but there are some fantastic pyramids in Mesoamerica, as we'll talk about in a little more detail as we go along. Well known for their huge statues of heads that are found there in the jungle. Now, the Olmecs spread their influence through both trade and military force. They had large trading networks. They were pretty powerful militarily speaking. Metallurgy is not a thing here. They don't have bronze, they don't have iron, so very different than, say, China, Mesopotamia, India, others that we've talked about. Now remember, Egypt did not have metallurgy until pretty late in their history. Their big thing was obsidian, this very sharp volcanic glass. It's brittle, of course. It doesn't have the strength of metal, but it is razor sharp. They could cut through a lot of things with obsidian. Eventually, the Olmec destroyed, and historians believe that they destroyed their own ceremonial centers. And exactly why is unknown, but it does signal the demise of the Olmec. They fell roughly 400 BCE, so about 2,400 years ago. And this kind of gave rise to their successors, who were the Maya, who were the first powerful successors anyway. Mostly located in southern Mexico and central Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, some of those countries there. Their rise, about the 3rd century BCE, they were fantastic at building artificial terraces, which enhanced the fertility of the region. The area that they had chosen to settle in was not a very fertile area. It had thin soil, which meant that you really had to be careful with how you planted. They also cultivated the cacao bean, which is what you get chocolate from. And the cacao bean is so important that it eventually is used even as kind of a form of currency. The wealthy people, had a lot of rights to it, of course. They like to make their chocolate drinks and stuff, and kind of like bronze was in China, was a little bit of a social signifier. The more cacao beans you had, then kind of the more status you had, the more money you had. There were about 80 ceremonial centers spread throughout the Mayan areas of power. Eventually, again, some of those will become city kingdoms. Some of them 10, 20, 30, and up to about 50,000 people for the Mayans. Constantly fighting each other. Seems fairly typical of a lot of the native societies that we'll talk about in the Western Hemisphere, a lot of infighting and stuff. But the warfare was a lot different than European warfare. In the Mayan warfare, their purpose wasn't really to kill their enemy. They'd meet their enemy out on the field in hand-to-hand combat, and they wanted to capture their enemy, knock them unconscious, take them back with them as prisoners. That's how you earned true honor. It wasn't killing in a battlefield. These prisoners would go back to the Mayan cities, where they would typically end as either slaves or on the sacrificial altar. The Mayans sacrificed many people. Warfare caused this constant state of tension until about the 800s, when the city kingdom of Chichen Itza, make sure you know them, sought to establish a political framework that was outside of the fighting. They tried to rise above the fighting, and so they brought an era of stability for a couple hundred years. But even with Chichen Itza, the Mayans began to fall. Nobody really knows why the Maya fell. They really just abandoned their cities and let the jungles grow up over them. When the Spanish came in the 1200s, the Mayan civilization was already gone. There were some Mayan-speaking peoples left in the jungle, but as far as the great cities and this wonderful culture that had existed, the jungle had reclaimed it, and they had just left. Historians believe fighting, climatic conditions, that there are a host of reasons of what happened, but we just really don't know for sure the exact reason. Okay, this is it for part 1.